Under the silver veil of twilight, when the city below seemed to hum with lives she no longer recognized as her own, Jade sat in the quiet of her room, the window slightly open, letting in a breeze that carried both chill and comfort. She had always loved this time of day, the gentle hour when the noise softened, when the sky spilled its last light like watercolor across the horizon, when the world seemed to whisper that endings could also be beginnings. There was something healing in that moment, something that wrapped softly around her heart, even as it ached. For years she had lived with a story she thought was hers. The devoted wife, the silent partner, the gentle presence, standing in the shadow of a man who had promised to protect her. It had once seemed noble, even romantic, this sacrifice of her dreams, this quiet surrender of her ambitions. But as she gazed at the fading light, she felt the subtle cracks in that story, as though the universe itself were reminding her that she was meant for more than silence, more than being hidden away like a secret too fragile to show. The air carried memories tonight. She could still recall their first meeting as if it had been carved into the marrow of her bones. It had been raining, soft rain, not heavy enough to drench, but enough to make the streets shine like mirrors. He had offered her his umbrella, his smile warm, his charm undeniable. In that moment, her heart had believed. Healing, she thought now, sometimes begins in the very moments when we surrender too quickly, too deeply, to someone else's light. For it is only later, when that light flickers, that we learn how to kindle our own flame. Jade's hands brushed over the books lined neatly on the shelf beside her desk. Once these had been her weapons, legal texts, case studies, the inked maps of a brilliant future she had dared to envision. She had traded them for love, or what she thought was love. And yet, despite the quiet betrayal seeping into her days, she could feel those same books now whispering back to her, reminding her of who she truly was. Her fingertips lingered over the spines, as though touching them could draw courage back into her blood. Outside, laughter rose from the street below. Couples walking home hand in hand, friends gathering, strangers sharing glances in the glow of shop-front lights. She listened, not with envy, but with a strange, soothing acceptance. The world would continue to love, to ache, to fall apart, and to heal. And somewhere in that vast rhythm, her own heart would find its melody again. When she had first stepped into marriage, she had imagined a life painted in vivid colors, candlelit dinners, whispered confessions, the ease of a shared dream. For a time it seemed real. She had believed in the fairy tale, the kind where a woman gives up pieces of herself and in return is cherished, protected, seen. But the truth had been different. She had been loved in shadows, tucked away like something unworthy of light. She had been made invisible, and invisibility, she now realized, was its own kind of wound. But even wounds have their strange beauty. They remind us of battles survived, of moments endured, of strength we never knew we had. Jade touched the hollow of her throat, where her pulse beat steady, and whispered to herself words she had not spoken in years. "I am still here." There was a healing power in such a declaration, quiet though it was. A promise to herself that she would no longer measure her worth in the reflection of another's eyes. She leaned against the window, letting the breeze kiss her skin, carrying with it the scent of rain-soaked stone and distant blossoms. London at night could be merciless, but in its chaos there was also a strange serenity. She closed her eyes and imagined a different life. one where she was not hidden, one where her laughter rang out in crowded rooms, one where she walked into the light without apology. The thought wrapped around her like a balm, soothing and painful all at once. Memories pressed at her like waves. She remembered the nights she had waited, alone, for him to come home. The excuses, the distracted smiles, the scent of another perfume clinging faintly to his suit. Each time she told herself not to question, not to break the fragile surface of what they had. To confront him, she feared, would be to shatter the fragile glass house of her marriage. But glass houses are not meant to last. And perhaps, she thought, healing often begins when the glass finally breaks, when the shards cut deep enough to make us rise from the floor. She thought of the woman she once was, the law student who spoke boldly in lecture halls, whose eyes burned with ideas, whose professors told her she would change the world. She thought of how she had silenced that woman for the sake of love, how she had folded her brilliance into smaller and smaller spaces until it nearly disappeared. But embers, no matter how deeply buried, still glow. And tonight, as the city hummed below, she felt those embers warming again. The night deepened. Stars pricked through the clouds, fragile and luminous. Jade wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and whispered softly, as though to the stars themselves, "I will not be hidden any more." The words carried weight, like a vow stitched into the fabric of her soul. They were healing words, words of gentle defiance, words that told her the story was no longer his to write. In her heart, she carried both the ache of betrayal and the soft glow of something new, a beginning she could not yet name. The pain was real, yes, but it was no longer all she felt. There was also a quiet determination, an undercurrent of strength rising like a tide. She would walk through the fire of this ending, and she would emerge, not burned, but reborn. She stayed at the window long after the city lights blurred into the distance, long after the world below had quieted. She stayed until the sky began to pale with the first hint of dawn. And when she finally turned away, there was a steadiness in her step that had not been there before. She did not yet know what awaited her, the heartbreaks, the confrontations, the transformations yet to come. But she knew this: she would no longer be a secret, no longer the invisible wife. She would step into her own light, and that light would be enough. And in that certainty, fragile yet fierce, she found her first taste of healing. The morning arrived wrapped in a pale light, softer than silk, almost reluctant to wake the city from its slumber. Jade lay still, her body curled against the linen sheets, listening to the distant murmur of London, the hum of buses, the footsteps of early workers, the rhythm of a city that had no idea her heart had been fractured. She opened her eyes slowly, as if afraid that daylight would make her wounds visible. Yet in that fragile space between sleep and waking, she felt something almost tender, as though the dawn itself whispered healing into her spirit. She had always been the one to rise early, to prepare the coffee just the way he liked, to fold his shirts with care, to step into her role as if devotion were a destiny written in her veins. And yet, as she sat up and let the morning air brush her cheeks, she realized she no longer wished to carry love like a burden. She wished for love to be soft, like the sunlight now pouring through the curtains, warm, generous, unashamed. Memories pressed in on her. 8 years. 8 years of believing she was cherished, 8 years of telling herself that his distance was a sign of his desire to protect her. 8 years of making excuses for why she was never at his side during company galas, why he preferred her silence to her laughter. She remembered the words he had used so often. "It's better this way, Jade. Those parties are cruel. I don't want them to hurt you." She had smiled then, grateful for his apparent thoughtfulness, unaware that every smile was a thread weaving her into a cocoon of invisibility. As she rose, her bare feet touched the cold marble floor, and she felt a shiver crawl up her spine. The apartment was beautiful, filled with art, polished wood, curated furniture. But beauty, she knew now, can be a mask. The rooms no longer felt like hers. They felt like a stage where she had been instructed to play a minor role in someone else's grand performance. She paused in front of the mirror, and for a moment she almost didn't recognize the woman staring back. The eyes were hers, yes, almond-shaped and once full of laughter. But now they carried something different, something sharp, something quietly radiant. Pain had left its mark, but beneath it flickered a fire, and the fire whispered of healing. She turned away from the mirror and moved toward her desk. There lay a stack of documents, contracts she had reviewed, market analyses she had written, the invisible labor she had contributed to build the empire he proudly called his own. He had thought she was only a shadow, a silent figure in the background. But every page on that desk held proof of her mind, her strength, her brilliance. She traced a finger across the papers, not with bitterness, but with a strange tenderness, as though acknowledging the younger version of herself who had worked tirelessly out of love. That younger Jade had given all she had. This Jade would not give away the rest of her life. Outside, the bells of a nearby church rang, soft and steady, marking the hour. Jade closed her eyes and let the sound seep into her, a rhythm that reminded her of something ancient and eternal. Healing, she thought, is not about erasing pain. It is about letting time weave the pain into the fabric of who we are until it no longer cuts, but strengthens. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. A message from her best friend, Carmen. "Are you all right? I saw the photos from last night. He wasn't alone, Jade." The words were like salt on an open wound, and yet she did not cry. Not anymore. Instead, she placed the phone down, walked to the balcony, and let the wind kiss her face. She whispered softly into the open air. "Yes, I saw, and I will be all right." The words were fragile, but in speaking them, she felt the first fragile threads of healing begin to weave. The city below continued its restless pace, people hurrying, taxis honking, vendors calling out their morning specials. It struck her how indifferent the world could be to individual heartbreaks. And yet, within that indifference, there was also comfort. Life moved on, and so would she. Every passer-by had a story. Every stranger carried secret griefs. Yet the sun still rose, the streets still pulsed, and hearts, however broken, still learned to beat again. She returned inside, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. The scent of his cologne still lingered faintly in the hallway, a ghost of nights spent waiting, of kisses given without love. She let the ache come, let it bloom in her chest, and then she let it soften. Healing, she realized, was not a single moment of triumph. It was this, the small act of allowing pain to exist without letting it destroy her. Jade sat down at the desk again, opened her notebook, and began to write. Not legal notes this time, not business plans. She wrote her own story in her own words for the first time in years. Words poured out of her like water released from a dam, words of longing, of sorrow, of awakening. She wrote of the little girl who once dreamed of changing the world, of the young woman who surrendered those dreams for love, of the wife who had been silenced, and of the woman now rising piece by piece from the ashes of betrayal. As the hours passed, her handwriting filled the pages, and with every line she felt her heart knit itself back together. Writing became her medicine, each sentence a thread pulling her closer to herself. She paused only when the sunlight shifted, painting golden patterns across the marble floor. She pressed her hand against her chest, felt the steady rhythm of her heart, and smiled softly. She was healing, not fully, not yet, but enough to believe again in the possibility of tomorrow. By afternoon, Jade dressed herself in a simple navy dress, one she hadn't worn in years. She tied her hair back, applied a touch of lipstick, and looked once more in the mirror. She did not dress for him this time, nor for anyone else. She dressed for herself, for the woman who had been hidden, for the woman who now refused to disappear. The reflection in the glass met her gaze with quiet defiance. She whispered to herself, "You are enough." And in the saying of it, the words became a kind of prayer, a kind of healing that flowed through her veins. Evening fell. Lights bloomed across the skyline, glittering like promises. She stood once more at the window, but this time she did not feel like an outsider looking in. She felt like someone about to step into her own story, her own stage, her own life. The night air wrapped around her, cool and gentle, and she breathed it in as though it were a benediction. She thought of love, not the love she had given away, but the love she still carried within. Love for her own soul, for her resilience, for the possibility that someday, when the scars had softened, she might love again without fear. That thought, tender and healing, lingered with her as the stars appeared, one by one, like scattered diamonds across the sky. And when she finally closed her eyes, it was not with despair, but with a calm resolve. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the beginning of something new. The following days unfolded with a slowness that felt both fragile and purposeful, as if time itself wished to cradle Jade gently in its arms. She woke each morning to the pale embrace of sunlight brushing through sheer curtains, and though her heart still ached with the weight of betrayal, she found herself listening more closely to the small things, the sound of sparrows quarrelling near the balcony, the faint rustle of the city rising below, the comforting hum of the kettle as it warmed water for tea. Healing, she realized, was stitched not in grand revelations, but in these quiet rituals, where life proved itself faithful in ways her marriage never had. She began walking again, not rushed, hurried steps to catch the underground or to reach an office, but slow, deliberate strolls through familiar streets that now seemed foreign. The cobblestones glistened after morning rain, their scent mingling with the perfume of bakeries preparing bread. She let her fingertips trail against the iron railing of bridges, let her eyes rest on the Thames as it carried both debris and dreams downstream. In the rhythm of her footsteps, she felt her thoughts loosen. Each breath became a reminder. You are here. You are alive. You are healing. In these walks, Memories surfaced, some tender, some sharp. She remembered how Clay once held her hand in Hyde Park, whispering plans for a future that shimmered like a golden horizon. She remembered how she believed him, how she offered not only her trust, but also the vast landscape of her ambition. Yet even as the sting of those recollections rose, she found herself softening toward the woman she had been. That younger Jade, so eager, so full of faith, had not been foolish. She had been brave in her willingness to love. Healing meant not cursing that innocence, but honoring it, then letting it rest. One afternoon, while drifting through Notting Hill, she wandered into a small bookshop. The air inside was warm, laced with the earthy fragrance of old pages and polished wood. Rows of novels, poetry collections, essays on philosophy, all waiting like companions eager to speak. She let her hand wander across the spines until it paused at a volume of poetry she had once adored in university. She opened it, and the words leapt back into her like forgotten music, verses about love's sweetness, but also its cruelty, about wounds, but also the miracle of mending. She bought the book without hesitation, as though reclaiming a piece of herself that had been waiting patiently in the dark. Back at home, she curled in the corner of her sofa, reading until the lamps cast golden halos against the walls. Every stanza felt like a mirror, reflecting not only her pain, but her capacity for renewal. She whispered lines aloud, letting the syllables linger on her tongue like a healing prayer. The words did not erase her grief, but they gave it form, shape, meaning. And sometimes, she thought, meaning is the softest medicine of all. Carmen visited one evening. With her came laughter, sharp observations, and a fierce loyalty that wrapped around Jade like a blanket. They shared wine at the balcony, the city glittering beneath them. Carmen spoke of articles she was writing, of scandals in high society, of gossip that would normally have made Jade smile indulgently. Tonight, Jade listened differently. She was no longer the hidden wife, tucked away from parties and whispers. She was a woman who had survived humiliation and who now sat with her best friend, listening to the symphony of life with ears newly opened. "You're glowing again," Carmen said softly, touching Jade's hand. "Not because of him, because of you." Jade smiled, her eyes shimmering. Healing was not only in solitude, she realized. It was also in friendship, in being seen without judgment. Nights became her sanctuary. She would light a single candle, its flame steady, casting shadows that danced like silent companions across the walls. She sat by the window, journal open, and let her thoughts spill. At first, the words were jagged: anger, sorrow, disbelief. But as days passed, gentler tones emerged: hope, resolve, gratitude. She wrote of the woman she wished to become, a woman who walked without apology, who loved without shrinking, who forgave herself for every silence she had endured. Writing became more than a habit. It became an act of healing, each sentence a small thread pulling her broken pieces into wholeness. One particular evening she closed her eyes and imagined herself at the grand party Clay was planning, the one he would attend with the woman who now occupied the space Jade once held. The thought no longer tore her open. Instead, it filled her with a strange, shimmering calm. She imagined herself walking into that hall not as his wife, not as his shadow, but as herself, radiant, confident, undeniable. The image was not one of revenge, but of reclamation, a quiet declaration that she would no longer be erased. Healing, she thought, sometimes looks like imagining yourself free long before you truly are. On Sundays, she visited the small chapel near her street, not because she was devout, but because the silence there felt like a balm. The wooden pews creaked under her as she sat, the faint echo of footsteps from others drifting like whispers. Stained glass windows caught the light, scattering colors across her hands, across her face. She bowed her head, not to pray for his return, but to thank the universe for her awakening. She whispered gratitude for the lessons, however cruel, and for the chance to begin again. Gratitude, she learned, was a form of healing too, the kind that turned scars into soft reminders rather than heavy chains. As autumn deepened, she found herself drawn to beauty again. She bought fresh flowers for her home, peonies, roses, lilies. She played music she had once loved, filling the apartment with melodies that spoke of longing, but also of joy. She cooked meals not for him, not out of duty, but for herself, savoring each flavor as a celebration of her own presence. With every act, she felt pieces of her spirit return, as if love, denied for so long, was finally circling back, not from another, but from within. And yet, there were still nights when the ache returned, when loneliness pressed against her like a heavy shadow. She did not fight it any more. She let it sit beside her, acknowledging it like an old companion. She whispered to it, "You will not last. I will outgrow you." And in that gentle acceptance, she felt herself healing more deeply than she ever had through denial. She stood at the balcony one evening as rain began to fall. Droplets clung to her lashes, ran cool against her cheeks. She lifted her arms slightly, allowing the rain to touch her like a benediction. In the rhythm of falling water, she felt a promise. Storms do not last forever, and even the heaviest clouds eventually give way to light. She smiled, a soft, healing smile, and whispered to herself, "You are no longer hidden. You are becoming." In that moment, surrounded by the vastness of the city and the intimate hush of rain, Jade knew she had begun to walk a path where every step would be her own. The woman she once was, the silent, invisible wife, was fading like mist. In her place stood someone luminous, someone whole, someone who believed again in love, not because of him, but because love was her birthright. And though the road ahead would not be easy, though tears would still visit her, she carried within her a new truth. Healing is not the end of pain, but the transformation of it. And in that transformation, she found not only survival, but the quiet, breathtaking possibility of joy. The night of the grand party descended upon London like a velvet curtain embroidered with gold. Street lamps glowed against the damp pavement, and the air carried that peculiar mix of perfume and promise that only evenings of destiny seemed to hold. Inside her apartment, Jade stood in front of her mirror, her hands trembling slightly as she fastened the final clasp of the emerald gown that hugged her figure with elegance. She had chosen this dress not for extravagance but for symbolism. It was the color of renewal, of forests after rain, of healing that takes root quietly yet powerfully in the earth. Her reflection gazed back at her with steady eyes. For so long she had stared into mirrors, searching for flaws, searching for reasons why she had not been enough to stand at her husband's side. But tonight was different. Tonight she looked and saw not absence, but presence, her own presence, radiant and undeniable. The soft waves of her dark hair framed her face. Her makeup was subtle yet luminous. Her lips touched with a shade of rose that whispered both vulnerability and strength. She touched the glass lightly, as though sealing a vow with her reflection. You are here. You are worthy. You are whole. The words were healing, like a quiet melody flowing through her veins. As the clock neared 7, a car waited below, sent by Helen, the event organizer who had arranged Jade's entrance under a new identity. She descended the staircase with a grace she hadn't known she possessed. Every step felt like the shedding of an old skin, every breath a passage toward freedom. The driver opened the door, and as she settled into the plush interior, she glanced out at the city lights rushing past. London, vast and indifferent, had been the backdrop of her heartbreak. Tonight, it would also witness her rebirth. The Savoy Hotel stood like a palace carved from glass and marble, its grand facade glowing beneath the chandeliers within. Guests in gowns and tuxedos streamed through the entrance, their laughter spilling into the night. When Jade stepped from the car, a hush seemed to ripple at the edge of the crowd. She moved with quiet dignity, her gown catching the light, as if it carried its own constellation. She felt eyes upon her, curious, admiring, questioning. For the first time in years, she did not shrink from them. Instead, she let them see her. Healing, she thought, sometimes begins when you allow yourself to be visible again. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers cast rivers of light upon polished floors. Music floated from a live quartet, mingling with the clink of champagne glasses and the murmur of business negotiations disguised as pleasantries. Jade's heart pounded, but she carried herself with the poise of someone who had walked these halls in her mind 1,000 times before. Helen approached swiftly, her smile discreet but encouraging. "Welcome, Miss Montenegro," she said with deliberate clarity, loud enough for surrounding guests to hear. "How was your flight from Barcelona?" "Smooth and pleasant," Jade replied with a hint of an accent, her voice calm. "I am eager to meet your finest entrepreneurs this evening." The words flowed easily, almost playfully. She felt like an actress stepping into a role, yet beneath the performance lay truth. She was eager to step fully into her own power, eager to reclaim the dignity once stolen from her. Across the room, she saw him. Clay stood near the bar, Isla on his arm, both of them shining with the false glow of a story rehearsed too many times. He laughed with Japanese investors, gesturing broadly, confidence pouring from him like cheap wine. But then his eyes caught sight of the woman in emerald green. Jade felt the moment land between them like a spark in dry tinder. His smile faltered. His hand trembled slightly around the glass he held. He stared, as though unable to reconcile the vision before him with the memory of the wife he had dismissed as invisible. Jade did not look away. She allowed herself a soft smile, not of cruelty, but of serenity. For this was not merely revenge. This was revelation, the unveiling of a woman who had always been extraordinary, even when unseen. Healing was not about making him suffer. It was about standing tall, radiant, unashamed, in the very place he once denied her. Ricardo Mendoza appeared at her side then, tall, elegant, carrying the scent of cedar and confidence. He bowed slightly as he kissed her hand. "Miss Montenegro," he said warmly, "your reputation precedes you. Helen tells me you represent investors with vision. I would be honored to introduce you to my colleagues." "Thank you," Jade replied, her eyes glimmering. Vision is what shapes futures, is it not? Together they moved toward a circle of business leaders, Jade weaving into conversations with fluency and wit. She asked questions, listened intently, offered insights with precision. Soon, others gathered, drawn by her presence, intrigued by her composure. She felt alive in every word, every glance, every exchange. For years she had been silent, hidden, diminished. Now her voice was a force, her intelligence a flame too bright to be ignored. Clay, unable to resist, moved closer, leaving Isla momentarily stranded in awkward small talk. When he stood within reach, Jade turned slightly, her eyes meeting his with calm defiance. "Mr. Martin," she said smoothly, her voice pitched just enough for nearby ears to catch. "I've heard much about your company. I understand you're pursuing a partnership with Tanaka Industries." His face drained of color. Only he and Isla should have known that detail. How do you know that?" he stammered under his breath. Jade tilted her head, her smile serene. "The world has a way of revealing what is hidden," she murmured. "Don't you think?" His lips parted, searching for words, but before he could reply, Ricardo interjected with a sly smile. "Clay, I see you've already met Miss Montenegro. She has the keenest insight into international trade I've ever encountered. Perhaps she might offer you advice." Clay's jaw tightened. He glanced at Jade again, eyes pleading, confused, desperate. She, however, turned back to Ricardo, her expression soft but resolute. Her healing no longer depended on Clay's recognition. It bloomed in her ability to walk among these people as herself, powerful and seen. Across the room, Isla noticed the tension, drifting over with uncertain steps. "Babe," she whispered to Clay, her voice trembling, "the Japanese investors are asking for you again." She glanced at Jade, curiosity and unease mingling in her eyes. "Who is this?" "This," Ricardo said smoothly, "is Miss Jade Montenegro, a woman with vision, elegance, and remarkable intelligence. London will not forget her after tonight." Ela blushed, fumbling for composure, but Jade only inclined her head politely, her smile as gentle as moonlight. She felt no malice toward the girl. Ela was young, naive, perhaps complicit, but not the true architect of betrayal. Healing, Jade knew, was choosing dignity over bitterness. As the night deepened, whispers spread. Who was this radiant woman who had captivated the floor, whose presence silenced conversations and sparked curiosity? By the time the orchestra shifted into a sweeping waltz, Jade had become the quiet center of the room, the star no one expected. She danced once with Ricardo, her movements fluid, graceful, her laughter echoing like bells. And though Clay watched from the shadows, consumed by regret, Jade no longer needed his gaze. She was not here for his validation. She was here for herself. When the final toast was raised, champagne glasses glittering beneath the chandeliers, Jade lifted hers with steady hands. "To new beginnings," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard. Around her, others echoed, "To new beginnings." The words floated upward, mingling with the light, sealing the night with a promise. As she left the ballroom, her heels clicking softly against marble, Jade felt lighter than she had in years. The city air welcomed her, cool and fresh, the stars above glimmering like companions. She inhaled deeply, and for the first time since betrayal had shattered her world, she felt whole. Not because she had humiliated anyone, not because she had been seen, but because she had reclaimed herself. Healing, she thought, is not the absence of scars. It is the ability to walk into the night with them shining like constellations. She stepped into the waiting car, emerald gown sweeping elegantly behind her. Through the glass, the lights of London blurred into a tapestry of colour. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and whispered to herself with quiet certainty, "I am free." And in that whisper lay the most romantic truth of all. She had fallen in love again, not with a man, but with her own life. The morning after the gala was unlike any other morning she had lived in the last 8 years. The city outside still moved with its usual rhythm, cars rushing down wet streets, children clutching their parents' hands, shopkeepers pulling up their shutters. But within Jade's chest, something vast and quiet had changed. She woke without dread. She woke without waiting for footsteps in the hall, without the weight of wondering whose perfume clung to his suit. Instead, she woke to the gentle hush of her own breath and the soft glow of sunlight stretching across her sheets. It felt like the first sunrise of a new life. Healing, she thought, can arrive in silence, not with fireworks, but with the tender realization that you are no longer carrying chains. She moved slowly that morning, savoring the ordinary details she had once overlooked. She made herself coffee and lingered over its aroma, letting the steam brush her face. She opened the balcony doors and stepped into the cool air, her emerald gown from the night before now folded carefully in its box, no longer a costume, but a relic of transformation. Below, London carried on, unaware of the revolution that had taken place within her. She smiled, and it was not the practiced smile of a woman hiding sorrow. It was soft, genuine, and healing. Letters began arriving in the days that followed. Investors who had once dismissed her reached out with curiosity. Journalists requested interviews. Old professors sent words of pride, reminding her of the brilliance they had always seen. Each message was like a stone laid in the foundation of the life she was building anew. She no longer moved in shadows. She was no longer the wife hidden behind curtains of excuses. She was Jade, seen, respected, whole. Carmen came often, her laughter filling the apartment like sunlight spilling into dark corners. Together they planned the beginnings of Jade's own consultancy, a company that would bear her name, her vision, her courage. It was not revenge that fueled her now, but purpose. Revenge had been the spark, but healing was the fire that warmed her days. She realized she wanted more than to expose Clay's lies. She wanted to create something enduring, something that would stand as proof that women who have been silenced can rise with voices so strong they change the world. Weeks turned into months. The memory of the party lived in whispers across business circles, but Jade no longer lingered on it. Instead, she poured herself into work she loved, into mornings at her desk with coffee and candlelight, into evenings spent drafting strategies and mentoring younger women who came to her for guidance. Each success was sweet, but sweeter still was the sense of belonging to herself. For the first time in years, her heart did not measure love by another's approval. It measured love by the steady rhythm of her own steps. Sometimes, when loneliness crept into her evenings, she allowed it to sit beside her. She would light a candle, pour tea, and whisper, "I see you, but you will not stay forever." She did not fear solitude anymore. Solitude had become a sanctuary, a place where she met herself with kindness. And in those quiet hours, she discovered the most healing truth of all: she was enough. Clay's name appeared in newspapers. but now it was attached to words like bankruptcy and scandal. She read the stories not with triumph, but with calm detachment. His downfall was no longer hers to carry. Isla's name appeared briefly too, then faded, a reminder of how quickly illusions dissolve. Jade did not wish them harm. She simply wished them gone from the center of her life, and in that wish she found peace. Healing, she realized, was not about erasing the past, but about refusing to let it dictate the future. Her office at the top of a glass tower overlooked the city. Each morning she stood before the window, watching the Thames shimmer, the rooftops stretch endlessly, the people move like threads weaving a vast tapestry. She placed her hand against the glass and whispered, "You are part of this, Jade. You are not hidden anymore." Her staff admired her. Clients trusted her. Friends celebrated her. She had become not only the architect of strategies, but the architect of her own life. And yet, she did not harden. She remained tender. When she spoke to young women who feared their voices were too small, she told them gently, "Your story matters. Don't let anyone write it for you." She created a foundation to support women reclaiming their careers after sacrifice. Each story she heard, each woman who rose again, added another stitch to her own healing. Love, too, returned to her, though in unexpected ways. Not the desperate love of clinging to someone else's shadow, but the gentle love of friendship, of art, of evenings spent in quiet joy. She met men who admired her strength, who listened when she spoke, who saw her not as an accessory, but as a force. She did not rush into romance. She let it unfold like spring blossoms, patient and natural. And when her heart fluttered again at the touch of another's hand, she welcomed it, not as salvation, but as a gift she could accept or decline on her own terms. One evening, as the city below glowed with lights, Jade stood on her balcony, wrapped in a shawl. She gazed at the stars scattered across the sky and felt the wholeness of her journey settle into her bones. She thought of the woman she had been, naive, silenced, hidden. She thought of the woman she had become, resilient, luminous, healing, and she whispered into the night, "Thank you. Thank you for breaking me, for in breaking I was remade." The wind carried her words gently, as though the universe itself nodded in agreement. And so her story was not one of destruction, but of rebirth. A love story, yes, but the greatest love story of all, the love of a woman for her own soul. If this story touched your heart, if it gave you even a little light on a dark day, let that be our shared healing. And if you found comfort in Jade's journey, I invite you to like this video, subscribe for more stories of resilience and love, and leave a comment below about what healing means to you. Your words might just be the light someone else needs tonight.